So that's the reason for everyone being muted and their screens are off. So thank you for coming this evening. My name is Mark Roberts. I think I recognise some names in the chat there, and a few people have probably met me out and about. I'm the membership and events coordinator for the trust. So if any of you are members, thank you for your continued support. We couldn't do the work we do without you. And I've probably met a few of you out and about on events and things like that. Well, thank you for joining us on what's an absolutely wonderful evening outside. So yeah, we apologise for taking you away from what's probably going to be a lovely sunset again tonight. But I promise you, this talk will be really, really fascinating and interesting for those who obviously know Cemlyn and are looking forward to the turn season up there this year. That I especially am this year. So, we've got Chris Wynn with us tonight, and as you can see from him, he's actually sat at Camden tonight, aren't you, Chris?
Of course I am, yes.
So, Chris will be hosting our talk as our senior reserves officer. A couple more people coming in. So, just a bit of housekeeping. The chat is open, so if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to relay most of the questions over to Chris, either throughout the talk or at the end. I do need to nip out for 10 minutes at some point. So towards the end of the talk, if I haven't replied to all the questions yet, I will be back to finish the talk off with Chris. I won't be leaving on his own. Yeah, that's exactly what the chat's for. So without further ado, I'll put you over to Chris Wynn, our senior reserves officer, for this evening's talk.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for your help. And good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. So tonight I'm just going to talk about Cemlyn and have a look back to 2024 and some previous years as well in terms of what happened, but also look forward to this year and what's going on at Cemlyn, and finish off with some sort of a little bit of birdie news from a few of our other reserves as well. So firstly, uh, I'd just like to put our work at Cemlyn into a bit of context. Um, and so, in particular, thinking about our role and what we're really aiming for is for nature in North Wales to be in recovery, and what that will mean is that there will be abundant and diverse wildlife across North Wales, not just on nature reserves, but in the farmland and in our towns and cities and around our villages as well. And the natural processes, the processes that support that wildlife, are also allowed to occur. And so we have a wilder landscape and wilder seascapes as well. It's important, particularly since we're thinking about a seabird this evening. For the most part, important to consider our marine environments as well. But equally importantly, is that people and nature can thrive together in those locations. And I think Cemlyn is a really good location of that, where it's not just a fantastic place to see wildlife, but it's a great place to be and great place to enjoy the coast, and just the surrounding environment as well. But as I said, one of the really important things that we're trying to do is get people to take action for wildlife. And if you follow us on social media, you probably have seen some of the work we're trying to do about the red route in northeast Wales, on a recovered bypass proposal. So yeah, but that's just one of our particular bits of work. But that's equally important, is getting people taking action themselves for wildlife. Yeah, and
Chris, can I just interject for 1 second?
yeah,
So just something I just hadn't mentioned at the start of the talk
oh yeah,
is
oh, yeah.
I will send an email out afterwards for the talk. So any of the big issues like Chris is talking about the red route and things like that, I will send you an email afterwards. So if there's anything you want to know more about, I will send that in. And if anything extra you want to ask after with the talk as well, you want to know, you're more than welcome to email me as well, and I can pass the questions on to Chris. Sorry, Chris, I just thought I'd
No, it's all
mention
right.
that
Look,
there.
that's important because yeah, people can pick up on that sort of information and what we're doing. That's great. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, good reminder. Yeah, so and finally, just in terms of our role, what we really want to see is nature playing a central and valued role. And perhaps, beavers are a good example of that. They're often in the news at the moment with them being reintroduced in different locations around the UK, and how important they are in terms as ecosystem mechanics, really, or ecosystem engineers, and how important they can be, in particular with things like flooding as well. But it's important to remember that where we're actually at the moment is not in a very good place as far as wildlife is concerned. And the recent State of Nature report that was produced for Wales, it was back in 2023 now, highlighting some of the problems that not only that our habitats are facing, but also some of our species are facing as well with the decline in numbers. And I think as we've sort of headed into this warmer weather, one of the things that's been in the news quite a bit is how 2024 was a really bad year for butterflies, and even our commonest butterflies, or previously commonest butterflies, had a very bad year in 2024. So we're looking forward to this year to see what fortunes will bring, and obviously that's something where people can help, even if it's interested in their garden. So just to quickly recap on, it's great to hear that quite a few out there are members, but just to sort of highlight what the trust looks like in a few figures. So now we've got over 10,000 members, and Mark could probably update me exactly on what that is. But that's thanks to Mark and yourselves and the work of our membership team. But we've also got a team of volunteers as well, over 800 volunteers who do all sorts of work, not only the practical work you can see there, but working in our shops, and with our other members of staff in the marine team and the invasive species team as well. And now we have 36 nature reserves, and we're covering over 950 hectares, of which Cemlyn is one. So all our work and what we're trying to do is all set out in our strategy, and this is it. You can get hold of a copy online, and you can find out a bit more about the things that I've just been talking about, our three goals, and find out exactly what we're trying to do. I thought I'd start off with one question that often gets asked is how our work is funded, and making the best use of a pun that I can. We have lots of eggs in the basket. As far as Cemlyn is concerned, we've had a significant legacy, which is really helping over a period of many years, to fund our staff and our work. Also, the National Lottery Heritage Fund is particularly helping us with our work looking at recording wildlife and getting more people involved in that. And we'll talk a bit about that later on this evening. Anglesey Local Nature Partnership has also been helping us out this year. They've funded the purchase of materials to help us build some more tern nest boxes, which is fantastic and really helpful. Natural Resources Wales have always been a great help. And then, of course, shouldn't forget in-kind donations, and in particular at Cemlyn, it's time from our many volunteers who help out, but also materials. Okay, so just in case that anyone's new to Cemlyn and where it is, so this is a map of our 35 sites, 36 sites across North Wales, and that's Cemlyn up there on the north coast of Anglesey. It's just over 60 years old now as a nature reserve. 60th birthday in 2023. Yeah, so reached an important milestone, and hopefully there's many years to come. So at the moment at Cemlyn, the terns are literally sort of arriving in dribs and drabs, but there's still plenty to see around Cemlyn, as there is throughout the year. And one of the sort of really nice sights at the moment is the large flocks of golden plover that we see, sometimes through most of the winter, but particularly this time of year, in sort of early spring, late winter, and there can be several hundred birds. And it's fantastic if you do see them on a sunny day when they're in a big flock, and then they turn slightly into the sunlight, and they just sort of almost glitter in the sunlight. They're a really wonderful sight. But alongside those big flocks, we also get big flocks of lapwing at this time of year, or they're starting to disperse now. Unfortunately, we don't get any breeding lapwing at Cemlyn, but these big flocks are really nice. And of course, there's the evocative call of lapwing as well, which you can hear. But yeah, obviously, this is what Cemlyn is all about, and this is what we're hoping for this year. This spectacle of thousands of seabirds in the air and all the noise and the commotion that you get alongside that. Over the last sort of few weeks, we've been really busy at Cemlyn preparing for the season. And one of the most important things we do is protect the terns from, and the islands that they nest on, from flooding. So there was a weir at Cemlyn, and this is a sort of putting what we call stop logs in to control the amount of water that comes in. And if you look at the picture, there's a little gap at the bottom of those logs which allows some water in, and that's really important to allow a turnover of water in what is a brackish water lagoon. It's very important. On this particular occasion, we were being filmed. I think it's for one of Yolo's programs a couple of years ago. It's a great thing that we have lots of volunteers involved, and as this picture indicates, definitely a case of many hands make light work on this particular day. And as I said, the importance of the weir is to control water level, and I'll come back to talk a bit more about the importance of that later on. The reason we've got the weir is to prevent this happening. So this is a photograph from 1977 when the previous structure, not the existing weir, collapsed in a storm, and the colony was flooded, and all the chicks and eggs were destroyed. So a very serious issue, and the weir helps prevent that happening. So this time of year, there are a few other jobs we do, and here's a few pictures illustrating. Again, we have a good team of volunteers to help out. So one of the things we have to do is to get nest boxes out on the island. This involves people being ferried out in a boat. This is a flat bottom punt, which works really well, although it does need to be hauled out. And we put out a number of nest boxes. There's about sort of 60 or 70 nest boxes out this year, and that gives shelter for the tern chicks in particular. And that can be shelter from bad weather, but also shelter from aerial predators as well. So quite important for them. And the other thing, we hope, and we keep our fingers crossed every year, is it can encourage roseate terns to nest. The other really important thing we put out is the electric fence, and you can see here so the wire being installed onto the posts. That's really important, and I'll come on later on to talk a bit more about why that's important. Actually, it's the next slide. So you can see here the electric fence running around the island, and the terns sort of happily sat inside. So one of the things the electric fence does is it prevents disturbance. And I think one of the important things to remember is it's not just issues with predation. Well, obviously chicks or eggs or even adults can be eaten by something, but the actual physical disturbance can be a real issue. And one of the things that we're constantly aware of is how uniquely important Cemlyn is. It's one of only 3 tern colonies on Anglesey, and if you add in the little tern colonies further east in North Wales, it is a very small handful of important tern colonies in the whole of Wales. So literally our eggs are in very few baskets. So it's really important that we give them the best chance they can for that brief time when they're in Wales. So the electric fence really helps with that. So it stops things like an otter or even geese. You might not think geese could be a problem, but when large flocks waddle onto the island, they can cause a tremendous amount of disturbance, and that disturbance then creates opportunities for predators such as heron. So this fence has done a great job for the last sort of 7 or 8 years now in sort of reducing sort of disturbance almost to zero. Because this is what we're after. You know, as I said earlier on, a really nice sort of vibrant and thriving colony. Again, most of the birds you can see in this picture will be sandwich terns. But it's not just terns at Cemlyn, and one really important but perhaps quite common bird is the black-headed gull. And they're sort of present around Cemlyn year-round in some numbers. But this time of year, the numbers do start to build up and they get interested in nest building. And so by the time we get to midsummer, there could be somewhere between 250 and 350 pairs of black-headed gull nesting. Now, black-headed gulls are really important for terns, and in particular for sandwich terns. Black-headed gulls are very, very aggressive, and they will defend their nest against anything and anybody. So something like a peregrine, they'll have a go and they'll chase it away. They'll attack herring gulls or lesser black gulls, or even an enormous great black gull. So they're really aggressive, and sandwich terns really like that. They're not particularly aggressive, and they respond in a very different way to predators. They tend to sit tight and don't do anything until the very last moment, whereas black-headed gulls will be up there and at them as soon as anything comes anywhere near. So that sort of aggressive behavior is something that the sandwich terns really sort of appreciate as a bit of help. And here, I think with this first picture of a tern, you can see that some of the differences between terns and gulls. Gulls tend to be a bit sort of stocky, a bit rounded, and you see with the black-headed gull, you got this sort of chocolate brown head and the red legs and the red bill. The sandwich terns and terns in general tend to be much more, a bit more sleeker, a bit more graceful, and they have these much longer, lovely sweeping wings, and to some extent a sort of a forked tail. In the sandwich tern, it's not very long at all. Some of the other terns, which I'll come on to, it's much longer. And you can see the rather than this sort of almost like balaclava effect on the gull, with the terns, what you get is more of a black cap, more of a sort of flat cap effect. Um, Sandwich tern has a quite a large chunky bill with a yellow tip on the end, and the sandwich tern is perhaps it's the biggest of the three species of tern that we get regularly at Cemlyn. Next picture is an Arctic tern, and again, this highlights some of the key differences. So at the moment, we're getting sandwich terns start to arrive. Arctic terns will be a little while yet, and same with the common terns, be a couple of more weeks probably before they start to appear. And as you can see in this picture, one of the key differences is the colour of the bill and the colour of the legs. You can't see the legs on the sandwich tern, but they're black as well. Here you got the red legs and this red bill with there's a little hint of black at the end of that. But Arctic terns and common terns as well are a much more graceful, slightly smaller tern. And as you can see in this picture, with this common tern, red bill, but definitely this definite bit of black at the end. Slightly different shade of red as well compared to the Arctic tern. And again, on both these, you can see this the longer tail streamers. They do resemble swallows, and they are known as sea swallows as well. Yeah. So, how did we do at Cemlyn last year? So this nice little graph shows you. So if you go right over on this side, this dot here shows that last year we had around 2,000 pairs of sandwich terns, which was tremendous, and a fantastic and really unexpected increase on the previous year, which I'll talk about that in a minute. But as you can see, like any wild animal population, the numbers of breeding birds, and it's important to remember that this is breeding birds, has fluctuated. But there is this general trend upwards, and that's true as well across the whole Irish Sea. But there's been some fluctuations. So this one, I'll just mention this now, but I'll come back to talk about it later on. This sort of big drop from 2022 to 2023 is related to bird flu. I'll talk about that a bit later on. This big drop here is related to a significant disturbance and predation in 2017, which included an otter and included geese and included the heron, as I showed earlier on. So the following year, it's almost like the terns thought, well, we've had enough of that. So we didn't get very many at all, just over 500. But they've soon recovered, and now we've had a period of really good numbers. We've not reached the peak that we had sort of. I think this is what that. Just look at that. That's like 2013 or maybe 2014. So this is almost 2,600 pairs of sandwich terns. So that's important to remember. That's pairs. So that's 5,000 birds, which is a lot of birds. Yeah. One of the important things to think about in terms of the Anglesey tern population is that we're not just talking about Cemlyn. There are a number of sites. So this is Cemlyn over here, and then the other sites are here on the Skerries, which is the lighthouse island, almost visible from the tern colony at Cemlyn, but not quite. You have to go out to the headland up onto the drumlins to see. And then down here near Rosniger is the other important tern colony on Anglesey. And all three of them together are thought about as one special protection area, which is a European level designation and highlights how important Anglesey is for the terns. But also importantly, that special protection area includes not only the individual sites where the terns nest, but also their feeding areas. So this green pattern here is where they feed. And that's really important, that those areas, those waters are given some protection as well. And so that the fortunes of the terns have to be given some consideration in proposals that may be happening in the marine environment.
Chris, just
Yeah.
going back to that last map,
Oh, yeah.
is the just because I'm looking at it, is the gap at Holyhead for the ferries basically?
It looks like it is, isn't it? I think it might reflect where the terns feed. So that might be deep water.
Okay.
So, there are sort of shallower banks off Anglesey in various places. So it could reflect that, or it could reflect
Well,
that.
it's busy though, isn't it? There, it's just busy with leisure craft and everything else there
Oh
anyway, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah,
Yeah.
it would
So
be.
they
Yeah,
probably don't want to fish there anyway.
yeah, probably not. Yeah, yeah. So, and then you've got a crossover here with another internationally designated site sort of around the Menai Strait, this end of the Menai Strait as well. So yeah, so sometimes they do avoid areas where there will be known high levels of conflict. So, yeah. So as I mentioned, there are three tern colonies, but Cemlyn is the only one, was the only one in 2024 where sandwich terns were breeding. There has been a small population in recent years, other than last year, in the Inland Sea. Last year they didn't successfully breed, and that was probably down to some quite bad weather we had, sort of round about the end of March, early April. Just as they were arriving, it just seems to have put them off entirely from sort of being anywhere on their own in small numbers. So we think that they maybe moved on perhaps to Cemlyn. So in terms of numbers I'm talking about, Cemlyn can have 20% of the UK breeding population when we're having a good year. Um, so and this graph just takes those figures for sandwich terns and just gives you an idea of the population in the Irish Sea as a whole. And you can see that's the black line. And again, it has those sort of ups and downs through the years. And then Cemlyn at the bottom. To some extent, the changes at Cemlyn are reflected in the changes in the total population, which is what you'd expect. Um, um, but what's interesting is this black line, which is the whole Irish Sea population. If I sort of move on to a slightly different picture, a slightly more confusing picture, is made up of about a dozen different sites around the Irish Sea. Um, you can see that, and there's all sorts of things going on there. If you can follow one of those lines, there's all sorts of things going on. But generally, they all contribute together to this. Generally, apart from a sort of decline in recent years, generally increasing population. But some of these names that you see down here at the bottom of the slide are familiar to us at Cemlyn, and we know that terns do move around between the different colonies. And so we know places like Hodbarrow are sort of familiar to us at Cemlyn, and where our terns go to and come from. And I'll talk about how we know that later on. And Ladies Island Lake as well. So that these are sort of important places for sandwich terns around the Irish Sea. And the exchange of the populations as well is important. Excuse me. Okay. As I said earlier on, we get Arctic and common tern at Cemlyn as well. And the numbers are generally lower, as you can see. We're talking sort of hundreds here. The other two colonies on Anglesey are much more important, and particularly the Skerries, which hold almost as many Arctic terns as we do sandwich terns, if not more so, in some years. So you can see last couple of years, so the orange squares for common terns have been sort of hovering around sort of just about 100, whereas the Arctic terns have been in sort of a bit higher than that, although in 2023 they were down low as well. But yeah, so looking at all the years you've had been recording information, which go back to now to 1982, that's reasonable. So after a period which lasted for about 30 years of quite low numbers of Arctic and common terns, following a period in the the mid to late 90s, when there was a period of sort of quite bad weather, a little bit of predation and disturbance, and the numbers dropped and didn't really recover. There's some little blips until 2020, and then where you can see here, there's a sudden massive jump, and this jump was related to how the population of terns, common and Arctic terns around Anglesey moved about, and this was all brought about by COVID. Seems unlikely. I don't think there's any records of birds getting COVID, as far as I know. But what happened was the Skerries, which is a really important colony for Arctic and common terns, wasn't wardened in the same way that it normally is, and primarily because of disturbance, not predation, disturbance by a peregrine. It seems sort of partway through the season, the terns abandoned, and a lot of them came to Cemlyn, and a great number of them bred. So you can see here we had this amazing situation where we had 750 breeding pairs of Arctic terns and sort of around about sort of 250, 260 pairs of common terns. But what's equally important to realize at that time. And this picture, which is the one I showed earlier on, doesn't really do justice. Is alongside the breeding birds, there was literally hundreds and hundreds of non-breeding birds. So I sort of estimate that in a normal year we might get, say, maybe 6,000 terns if you add in all the ones that aren't breeding. In 2020, I think we were looking more like 10,000 birds around the islands and on the ridge. And because there were so many non-breeding birds, there was commotion and noise and activity all the time. It was just absolutely incredible. And because of COVID, not many people were visiting, but we were able to share this information online through our Facebook page. Yeah, and so towards the end of summer, people did get to see, but it was quite amazing. But let's go back to this slide with the numbers on. So we've seen from that big increase in that year, we have seen like a ripple effect with the numbers having increased and stayed a little bit high, which is great to see. And the other colonies, the scaries, have recovered as well and gone back to their previous numbers. So obviously, I mean, I've talked a bit about some of the problems that Tern colonies face, but there's a few that we're very aware of and we keep an eye out for. So things like mink, stoats and weasels. I've mentioned otters, and thankfully, we've not really had any significant problems with these. And this is probably down to a combination of being vigilant as to what's going on. So survey work, and there's me getting my nose up close and personal with something probably a bit sniffy, to know where they are. And there are we use a number of methods to deter the any predator really for that short window when the terns are there. And obviously, with something like an otter, we do have to take into account that an otter is a protected species as well. So we have to be very careful about what we do. But interestingly enough, and I think this is probably true of the three mammal species you see here, one thing that we've become aware of as we've sort of started to monitor their activity is the complex interactions that go on outside of the tern season, particularly between something like otters and foxes, and just the mere presence of those animals together. They seem to interact with each other, and we think that the otter, and we think it's a female that tends to be around, doesn't really like being around foxes much. So as the summer progresses, she seems to move away, and we get less and less evidence of there being otters around the lagoon at Cemlyn. This time of year, as I saw just a week ago, they do seem to be around, and it's very easy to find fresh spranks if you know where to look. So yeah, over the years we've sort of gained this much more detailed understanding of how all these animals interact together. So quickly, just to go back to this graph and just sort of really just use this to highlight. Well, there's an awful lot of information in this graph, and it highlights an awful lot of survey work, both by staff but also volunteers. And so every year, as I'm sure some of you know, we employ some wardens who are based at Cemlyn and are working alongside them. We have a team of volunteers as well. And one of the main parts of their jobs is just talking to people and providing help and information to people as they come along. A lot of the people who come to Cemlyn know about Cemlyn, but there's an equally big number who are really surprised as they walk along the ridge, which is part of the coastal footpath, and see all this noise and commotion. And they're often very interested to hear about the terns, and our wardens are there to do that. But equally important is the wardens and the volunteers role in collecting data, not just on the terns, but on a sort of a whole host of other wildlife as well. And so over the years, we've built up a fascinating picture of what lives at Cemlyn. Everything from the birds, but also through to moths and the invertebrates living in the lagoon as well. So one of the really important bits of work we do, and this is all work that's done under a license from NRW, is we go out and count the colony. So we have a team of people who do this as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So we're out for as little time as possible. And we do actually record what happens as a result of us doing this. So we get a picture of the impact on the birds of this, but not only of the impact of this, but also other events as well that disturb the colony. So here we are. This is a colleague, Ben, helping to count the eggs. If you look very closely in the sort of at the bottom of the picture on the left, you can see a couple of sandwich tern eggs there. So we work in teams of two, one person doing the counting, one person writing things down. And then afterwards, we have this very exciting cup of tea and a few biscuits when we await the figures. and that's what gives us this graph. So every year, there's a lot of important information here, and you can see so these two little suns on the left hand side. So this is the average number of breeding terns for all years, which is a bit less than 1,000, and that reflects this period sort of from the 80s through into the 90s when numbers were relatively low. But this number here is the 5-year average, and that reflects the greater numbers in recent years. And what these two numbers can move apart, come close together, depending on the fortunes of the terns, and so give us a good idea of the trend in the sandwich tern breeding population. But in terms of what we're doing at Cemlyn, counting the birds and watching their behavior is just one aspect of it. One of the other really important things is an understanding of how they're feeding is going and what they're feeding on. And luckily at Cemlyn, as with quite a few of the tern colonies, we can actually see what fish they're bringing in. And once you get your eye in for it, you can sit on the ridge and record the type of fish, maybe not down to species, but to get sufficiently well enough to give you a good idea. So this particular picture here, you've got a sandwich tern bringing in what I think is two fairly chunky sand eels there. So these will have been caught somewhere off the coast of Anglesey and flown back into the colony to feed the chicks, probably more than likely. So one of the things we try and do, you can guess the species, have a good guess. Sand eels are relatively easy to tell, but also we try and estimate the size as well, and obviously trying to do that in terms of an actual centimeters or inches, talking in old measurements. It's a bit difficult. So what we do is we use bill length. We sort of say so. Those two there. Actually, no, I think it's three. Isn't there? There's a third one there. They're about 1 to 1.25 bill lengths, and we use that sort of figure, and we record that information and record the range of species they bring in to give us a good idea. And thankfully, in recent years, food prey doesn't seem to be an issue at all at Cemlyn. There's been an awful lot of work done looking at the prey of terns and how climate change, and in particular sea warming, may affect the availability of prey. We don't seem to have seen any issues in the Irish Sea at the moment, which probably reflects sort of the complex oceanography for the Irish Sea. But in the North Sea, there have been some concerns about how the slightly warming seas are affecting the different types of sand eels that are available and who have different ecologies, which might make them more difficult for terns to fish for. So alongside sort of looking at how well the terns are breeding, and also what they're feeding, the other thing we're trying to understand is the distribution of not only the sandwich terns, but also the other terns as well. Obviously, our focus at Cemlyn is on sandwich terns because we've got such a significant population. So this little this map gives you a good idea of the global distribution of sandwich terns. So you can see there's this sort of pinky color, shows you where they breed, and it's predominantly in sort of northwest Europe with some sites sort of around the Mediterranean and then slightly further east. But then they have these non-breeding populations, and then these are their wintering areas as well. So what we know about sandwich terns from the UK and from around the Irish Sea, they head down the west coast of Africa. And how do we know that? We know that through ringing and flagging the birds. So I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of or be familiar with the standard BTO ring. That's that little silver ring you can see there. So that has a unique number on it. And if you do manage to get the bird in your hand, which sadly is often when the bird's died, whether it's a tern or any other bird, you can send that information in and find out where that bird was ringed, probably how old it was, what sex it was, and where it came from. So which is really interesting information. Recent advances, well, there've been advances for many years, have developed ways of being able to identify birds while they're still alive. So at Cemlyn, alongside a number of other tern colonies, we use these flags. So these are incredibly light and don't affect the behavior of the birds. So the color is specific to a site. The orange is Cemlyn, and then the number or the letter, sorry, is unique to the bird. So you can see that, and these are visible from the ridge at Cemlyn. So we have had birds coming back. and you know it's a bird ringed at Cemlyn, and there are other colours as well, and you can refer to sort of some of the ringers and the other research teams and know where a bird's come from. And then if you can, you can see the three letters and know when that bird was ringed. So this is one of the first birds we ringed at Cemlyn back in 2019. So these birds have now returned, this sort of cohort, back to Cemlyn, and they're sort of just about getting to breeding age now, which is really nice. And it's just amazing to know that this bird has bred at Cemlyn and then flown away and come back. One of the other really interesting things that we've been able to do at Cemlyn, and what we've learnt about, is what happens once the birds have finished breeding. There are a couple of sites around the North Wales coast where terns collect sort of post breeding and before they head off on migration. And one of those is Ross Point, where thanks to the work of a team of volunteers, which is amazing, we've got some really useful information about the birds that collect there. So this pie chart collectively shows us 207 sightings of 142 birds. So a few of the birds were seen at least twice, if not more. But you can see there's an awful lot of sites here. Obviously, and what this is looking at is those colour flags that I mentioned earlier on. So you can see in this particular year, lots of the birds came from Cemlyn, which is what you expect. It's not that far away. A fair chunk here came from Hodbarrow, which is just up the English coast into Cumbria. Quite a large number, almost a quarter, came from Ladies Island Lake, which is in Southwest Ireland. This group here from Anglesey, so this is birds that were ringed as adults. All these other ones are chicks. These birds were ringed as adults at Anglesey, sort of mid Wales. So caught in mist nets, so slightly different there. But so they make up, what's that? That's just 50, 60, there's just nearly 75% of the birds seen. But then you've got this interesting collection of birds here from all over the place, So there's a couple of, whoops, go back up. There's a couple of Scottish ones here, a couple of Scottish sites. And we know that one year, one Cemlyn bird went all the way up to Scotland and then came back down in a matter of a week. But interestingly as well, you've got things like these two sites here, the Farns and Coquet. So these are sandwich tern colonies on the eastern coast of England. So these birds have flown overland, perhaps. It's quite a significant distance to go all the way around, whether you go around the south or around the north, around Scotland. So it seems that they probably come overland, which is amazing in its own right. And then this site here is in the Netherlands. And I think it was only the one bird, but even so, the fact that a bird has come from the Netherlands to go and hang out for a while before it migrates is amazing. So this is like, just shows how important these roosting areas can be for birds, for the birds to collect. And it's almost as if they're trying to learn a bit about their home or potential home before they head south for the winter. And so here we have a particular bird, AJL, which was ringed at Cemlyn. And this bird, in its first winter, was recorded here, which is, I'll have to show you where, right around the tip of South Africa on an old harbour. So it's in amongst these birds down here, which is probably quite an interesting selection if we could zoom in, all sorts of exotic birds. So that is it for a bird that was probably only at the most 5 months old by the time it arrived. That is a tremendous journey. It's overall, it's about in a lifetime, it's like 400,000 miles. So each year that trip is about 20,000 kilometers. Sorry. So and that sandwich tern can live to 20 years. So 400,000 kilometers, which is about that, which is just incredible to think about for a bird that isn't very big, really. That it's traveling that far. So obviously there's all sorts of issues that can affect seabirds, particularly in birds that migrate such vast distances. And one of the ones, the type of threat that we keep a close eye on is developments in the marine environment or in the coastal area. And obviously some of you remember the proposal for the new nuclear power station at Wilver from a a few years back, but there's various other proposals actually in the marine environment, and these can all have an impact on uh, the terns, whether it's through where they nest or where they feed as well. And the one thing that's important to think about as well is the indirect effects as well, where, for example, the processes that allow a site to exist can be affected, sort of like how currents, sea currents, and tides might be affected. But in recent years, we've come up against another major problem, and I sort of hinted at this earlier on when I was looking at the population graph for terns, and that's avian flu, bird flu, highly parthenogenic avian influenza, to give its full name. And in sort of 2023, we had a significant and very serious issue across the whole of the UK, and that included in at Cemlyn. So I'll just quickly just sort of run through this and to get all the various colours up. So I think what happened at Cemlyn reflected sort of what was seen at some other colonies as well. And the reason this now seems more important is that it seems like avian flu is still out there. It's affecting, particularly seems to be, it's quite widespread in England at the moment, and it seems to be creeping ever closer to Wales. There's been a few cases in Wales. And what's equally alarming is the occurrence of the disease in mammals as well, particularly mammals that might be scavenging. So, the opportunities and the potential for transmission between different species is increasing. So avian flu could arrive at Cemlyn through any one of a number of routes. So we'll be keeping a close eye on what happens at Cemlyn and looking out for sick and dying birds. Because what we want to avoid is the sort of situation we did have in 2023. And as I said, what seems to happen is that the terns that arrived at Cemlyn were in considerably less numbers than we'd expect than the previous year, and we think that something was happening through the winter or during the migration. So we didn't see as many birds as we might expect, and not only were they not seen at Cemlyn, they didn't seem to be anywhere else. But thankfully, in 2024, we did see an upsurge. So yeah, who knows what actually happened? But this little graph just gives you an idea, and without going into too much detail, basically what we saw was that for the different species, the impact of bird flu varied. Overall, I think it was somewhere in the region of 1,500 to 1,750 birds, adults and chicks, died as a result of bird flu at Cemlyn. But you can see with the different species that the number of birds that were affected had a different effect on the population. For adult sandwich terns, relatively few affected, and with a population of 2,000 breeding birds or 2,000 birds, that's quite insignificant. But for common and Arctic, even though the numbers were, in the case of Arctic, slightly lower, and for common slightly higher, because the breeding population is so much smaller, that impact is actually quite significant. So that's over half the breeding population of common terns, and that's a little bit under there. But then if you look at the chicks and how the chicks were affected, there's a slightly different picture. For common and Arctic, relatively few affected, so about a third for the common, about a quarter for the Arctic terns. But for sandwich terns, a lot more chicks were affected, and that's sort of heading up towards half of the chicks, and obviously a lot more chicks were affected. So different species, slightly different impact. And with all terns being long-lived birds, we hope that the better season that they had in 2024 will really help the population bounce back and be a bit more resilient going forward. So if you do have a problem again in 2025, they will be better able to deal with it and to bounce back from that as well. So this map, which I got from the Animal and Public Health Authority website, just gives you an idea of the distribution of HPAI, bird flu, around the UK. And you can see the green colour is gulls, and obviously there are a lot of the records about gulls because they're a colonial species. And so it's easy for the disease to be transmitted. But there's other species also interesting is the number of birds of prey as well that you can see. So there are some birds of prey in Wales, but there's also a range of other species. So that's a slightly sort of closer picture for North Wales. And again, you can see these birds of prey. So this tends to be just one bird, whereas the gulls and stuff will be many birds. So natural resources well and the Welsh government are still appealing for any information that you can see if you do find dead birds to report it. And sometimes those birds will be collected and can be tested to see whether it's is actually bird flu that's affected them. So it's really important that we record that sort of information to help our understanding of what's going on in relation to bird flu. As I say, what we're hoping for this year, as I sort of wind up now, is a really good season at Cemlyn. And the sandwich terns are starting to arrive, and it's really nice to go out there and to hear them calling as they're flying overhead. And the numbers will start to build up, we hope, um, over the next few weeks. So by the time we get into May, we'll hopefully have a really good, strong population. But there's all sorts of other things we can look forward to as well. And we sort of really hope that, you never know what's going to happen. A couple of years ago, we had a pair of breeding avocet, which was amazing. I think it was the first pair of breeding avocet on Anglesey, as far as the records are concerned. I don't think there's another one. And amazing. Sadly, they weren't successful. It was the year of COVID, so but we're not quite sure whether it was COVID or whether there were other problems that meant the chicks didn't survive. But who knows? Maybe they will come back, and I think there's some avocets have been seen around other parts of Anglesey this year already. And of course, we do have breeding medgull, which is uh, quite good as well. Not usually we have sort of two or three pairs, and alongside those we do have a number of sort of non-breeding birds and juvenile and immature birds as well. One of relatively few places in Wales that medgull breed, and so they're really nice to see. And they actually do have a blackhead, unlike black-headed gulls, which have a chocolate brown one. So yeah, that's always a bit of a fun thing to do, is try and spot the medgull in amongst all the black-headed gulls, and listen out for the call as well. But there's also some other things that are just really exciting and good news as well. So I've known Cemlyn for many years, and thinking back, to sort of into the 90s, ring plover and even oystercatcher were a common sight around the reserve. And not only were they a common sight, they were a breeding bird. They would breed on the ridge, they would breed around the headland at Cemlyn, and then probably just due to a combination of things, but one of the most significant would have been just disturbance from people, an increasing number of visitors, and in particular dogs. They just stopped breeding on the ridge, in particular. But then 2 years ago, we had the first record of breeding pair of ring plover in many, many years, and that was just really encouraging. I think that was just testament to the work of the wardens, and they attempted again last year. So that's just really encouraging to see that through that work we can make a positive difference and give these sort of coastal birds a chance, which is why it's really important when visiting Cemlyn to pay attention to the signs and keep the dog on a lead, because although one person maybe isn't an issue, but there are so many visitors in our coastal areas now. It's important to bear in mind that there's an accumulative effect from everybody's visits. Yeah, so really exciting to hope that there will be ring plover. I quite like this photograph that one of our former wardens, Ruth, took us in the back. There's a turnstone, which you don't really notice until you look quite closely because it's so well camouflaged. You can see its red legs. But yeah, so there's a nice picture of ring plover there, and shadowed by a turnstone. But yeah, and just to finish off now, just a couple of highlights from around not just our natures or near our natures. One of which I'm sure you all seen. This is the ospreys returning to Llynbrennig, and now this is the first bird to return. I think the one of the potential partners has returned now, so that's really exciting. And you can sort of keep an eye on what's going on there on the webcam. But hopefully you'll get a chance to visit and meet some of our fantastic volunteers out there.
Just on that one, Chris.
Oh yeah, go on, Mark. That
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know the items.
Our female from Brennig is back, but the male hasn't returned yet. But we have
Oh,
got
okay.
another male,
Oh,
so
right, okay.
we have a pair, but it wasn't the same pair as last year. But there is still time for the male to come. So if anybody
That,
wants to pop to Brennig or just
yeah,
watch it on the webcam, there may be. Well, we don't know what's going to happen over the next couple of
no,
weeks. It
no,
could be interesting, to put it
yeah.
that way.
I do love the soap opera of the Osprey season, though. Seen last year's report of all the comings and goings of various ospreys and all the
Yeah.
squabbling that went on. It was you don't get that sort of a story with terns. It's just all like a massive white bird. But yeah, so that's really great. So you can watch that as well. And talking of watching things, sort of like this is like breaking news almost. So we've you might have seen we've got our barn owl webcam back up and running this year. And early this morning, they laid their first egg, which is fantastic. So this picture down the bottom right was taken quite early this morning. This was about 7 or 8 o'clock this morning when I had a look. I thought, oh, there they are. And as I was watching them, it was like they were sitting there talking to each other. They kept sort of turning inwards and looking at each other. And then I looked back later on about 10 o'clock and there was an egg. It was amazing. I was so excited. So that's really great. And you can keep an eye on that. And obviously, the ongoing story here is with the barn owls. They are sort of one of these species that aren't particularly doing that well in the UK as a whole, and they have had problems in some areas. So to be able to have a well protected nesting pair that can successfully raise chicks is really, really good news. So one of the benefits of this is that we can ring the chicks and understand a bit more about how the populations move around the local habitats as well. So really important and great to watch. Really exciting to be able to watch
And
that.
we're hoping this year that we don't have issues with spiders, aren't we, Chris? So in previous years we've had a spider put a web up right in front of the camera, didn't it? And
Uh,
we were just watching it
Actually,
as the hole got
yeah,
smaller and smaller and smaller. And this web just got bigger, which was quite funny. So
yeah. If the right hand bird wasn't stood where it was standing there, you could actually see the other camera pointing into the box. The box is behind the right hand bird there. So yeah,
but,
it's a
but that's
really
just nature doing its thing, isn't it, Chris?
yeah. Right. We also done just a nice picture of a beautiful barn owl in flight. Um, yeah, so just to finish off and wrap up now. Yeah, just to thank you all for your support. All of those of you members and for coming along and listening tonight. And if you can support us in some way, we really appreciate your help. And whether that's just joining our free e-newsletter or getting involved or becoming a member, we really appreciate your help and just help us to carry on some of the tremendous stuff that some of our staff are getting involved in protecting places like Cemlyn and birds like terns and barn owls and ospreys as well. If you want to find out more about the terns at Cemlyn, we do have some web pages about them, and you can follow the season through a sort of a timeline, a diary on our website that tells you what's going on and what's turned up. Excuse the pun. So yeah, you can find a bit more about it, and we've also got this nice infographic on our website, which you can sort of have a look at and interrogate a bit, find out a bit more about the different terns as well. And also, if you go onto our website and look at our blogs, you can find a bit more about the history of Cemlyn. As I mentioned, a recent birthday, we did run a series of blogs that looked into the history of the construction of the weir. The weir you can see here is the weir that was built by this man, who's Captain Vivian Hewitt. And he's pictured with two stuffed great auks. And those of you who like to listen to Start the Week on Radio 4 will have heard a recent piece about a new book about the great auk and the mystery of where all their eggs disappeared to after the last birds became extinct. So Captain Europe played a role in that. So you can buy that book, or you can read a bit more about him on our website. So there you go. So I don't know if there's any questions in the chat, but yeah, if anybody has got any questions, we can. I'll do my best to answer them. Or there's some stuff in the
Real.
chat. Thank you
Yeah,
all.
so like Chris said, if you've got any questions, put in the chat. I'll read out any comments in a second. But a couple of things for me though. If any of you do want to, Chris may have mentioned it, I may have missed it, but just to let you know again that the wardens will be doing walks every Sunday in June and the first couple of weeks in July. So if you actually want to go up to Camlin and actually see the wardens, you can go onto the website and you can book yourself on one of those walks, and it'd be lovely for any of you who want to come up and see them. The wardens will be more than pleased to see some people and take them around, won't they, Chris?
Oh yeah. The ones are there, day in day out, and really keen to sort of talk to people about what's going on.
One question for me is, do you remember you were talking about the black-headed gulls being quite aggressive with
Yeah,
the other things? So do they tolerate the terns then, and kind of vice versa?
yeah. They seem to. I mean, occasionally you might see them have a go at an egg, or and all the terns have been spotted, having a go at chicks. but they do seem to tolerate each other from that point of view. And with so many birds all so close together, it's not surprising that every so often, a chick doesn't get killed by another bird, or an egg get trampled on. And I think and we do see that from time to time. Yeah, so they do seem to tolerate each other. There's a couple of questions there. The
Yeah,
first,
I'll read them out to you, mate. That's fine. I'll
yeah,
go through them. Yeah.
that's right.
So
Yeah,
Polly
so
says an encouraging talk and such beautiful pictures, much needed in these awful times. So thank you for that, Polly. Um, Someone else says just many thanks, Chris. And then Tallulah asking, is there any effect noted from Wilver on the sandwich terns at all?
yeah. So there's no direct effect from the existing nuclear power station. There is, I suppose you could call it an indirect effect in that that's where the peregrines, and I see there's a question about peregrines as well. That's where the peregrines have nested, and that's where they come from. But there probably might be peregrines elsewhere as well. Um, so from what we can tell, there doesn't seem to be a significant effect from the functioning operational power station. Uh, I mentioned the proposal for construction earlier on, and there was a large number of concerns about the construction of a new nuclear power station on what would have been the biggest building site in Europe. Um, and at the moment, there's just sort of conversations, and you keep hearing stories about um, potential a different sort of nuclear power station at Cemlyn. So we'll keep an eye on that. The other question was about peregrines. Um, okay, so the thing about peregrines is equally important to realize is peregrines are a protected bird as well. So, and fortunately, um, although peregrines can kill adults or flying juveniles, they don't do it very often because they're not very successful. And what they tend to do is they take the birds off somewhere else to eat it, which is fine. There's a few moments of disturbance and chaos, and then the peregrine will go away. But we've never had a significant issue with a peregrine. We've tried various things in the past when we thought there might be, but peregrines are incredibly intelligent birds. And you can try things like scarecrows, because one thing they don't seem to like is the obvious presence of people on the ridge. So that might keep them away, and we've noticed that in the past. So we've tried things like scarecrows, that we move around, and you have to move it around quite a lot. So you might as well just be on the ridge yourself, because they get used to it stood still. So yeah, we do try sort of um, techniques like that to try and disturb them. But one of the important things is if they do kill a bird, is that they take it away somewhere, rather than land on the island, which is the worst thing. 'Cause then not only do you get that predation, you get that disturbance as well, and that's isn't good, because the colony goes mad.
Um, there's a question in there from Sam. What's the expected total tern population in the future if positive trends continue?
That's a very interesting question. In terms of what the capacity for the islands would be, um, we have done some work in the past where we've curated a little bit more actual suitable nesting habitat, and that seems to be taking time to mature, so to speak. It's been used by roosting birds and is used as an area for a creche as well. But one thing that the COVID year showed us, so we had, like I said, an extra 1,000 Arctic and common terns, 1,000 pairs. That's 2,000 birds. So they all fitted on there, um, and that was just a one-off. So you could expect that we could fit relatively easily another 1,000 pairs. But as to what would happen, whether it would go above that, I think what you'd need to consider was why that was happening, and what, because there'd be a reason for that, like there was a reason for that increase. And I think the other thing to bear in mind is that when you start to get very, very big colonies, you get what's called a ghetto effect, and although it's a very big colony, its actual productivity and its success in terms of raising young decreases because of the problems we've mentioned. One of them, the problem that infighting among the different species, diseases, and not just bird flu. There's other diseases that can affect the birds as well. Um, yeah, so there's all those sorts of things. So you don't necessarily want bigger and bigger to be better. There's a sort of an area or a number that is good. And one of our concerns at Cemlyn at the moment is what's going to happen long term in the future, with climate change and sea level rise, and how the islands at Cemlyn are going to respond to that, which includes the ridge as well. So there's a whole range of things that start to come into play if you're thinking about how big the tern population might be in the future. I hope that
Um,
answers
K-
the question.
Kayla's
Yeah.
asking that, well, you mentioned otters. Are there resident otters at Cemlyn?
Yeah, we are, yeah, yeah, they might be, but we don't think it's a breeding otter. We think it goes off somewhere else to breed. What seems to be the situation is that, and personally, I don't see them very often. I know people do see them, but what I do see is there signs like they're spranked, and there are a number of places around Cumberland where you can look for that. And what seems to happen is through the winter, and through maybe now through into later in April, maybe even early May, you'll find sprakes quite widespread around the lagoon and even around the coast. And as we sort of get into more into the summer, it's almost like it contracts into a smaller and smaller area, part of the reserve. And then there'll be a period when it stops. You don't get any fresh sprouting. It's as if the otter is spending more time somewhere else. And it might be that there's a better food source somewhere else. 'Cause apparently one of the things that otters do like to do is when they have young, fishing in a coastal area and finding relatively easy to catch prey is a good thing to do with the young. They get used to that hunting stuff. So they go after things like they'll just collect shells and off the bottom of a lagoon and dive and hunt for them, which shells don't move very quickly. Um, so they're able to catch them, and we do find that sometimes around the lagoon. And so I think they do move away. So they're there quite a lot of the year, but not all of the year. Um, yeah, which is nice. It's amazing that they're there. Just an
Great.
indication of what the population's doing in Anglesey as a whole.
Uh, Deborah says she hopes to maybe become a volunteer warden one day. Well, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah,
So what I'll do on
definitely.
the back of this talk is anything that Chris has mentioned, I'll send you links to all the websites and stuff like that. So I'll send an email tomorrow, and also if anyone came in late, I'll send a recording of the talk on. But all our details and contact details will be on there. So if anyone does want to get involved or whatever, please just contact us back, and then we can go from there, can't we, Chris?
Yeah, great. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, it'd be really great. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Looking
and
forward
Catherine
to it.
says thanks for the really nice talk. Kev says thank you and good luck for the season. So, yeah, thank you, Chris. It's
Yes.
been really, really informative. I think this is the third or fourth one we've done now, isn't it? With
Yeah,
going into
yeah,
the season, and it's really nice looking at those graphs. Obviously, the impacts of COVID and then the impacts of bird flu and things like that. It's really interesting to see, but hopefully, and it looks like the trend is generally slightly upwards, isn't it? And they're doing all right.
yeah. Hopefully it'll stay that way. Yeah,
Yeah, so brilliant. So yeah, I'll send this through to everyone tomorrow. And like all those links for anything Chris mentioned, I'll send those through in an email tomorrow to you all, guys. So thank you for joining us.
and I think there's still time to catch the sunset.
And there is, it's still nice outside. So Kayla says thank you as well. Joe says thank you. So yeah, I'll stop the recording there. I'll send you a link to everything tomorrow. And then if there's any more questions or anything you want for Chris or any of us at the trust, you'll have our contact details in there and you can go from there. And then hopefully some of you might go and see the wardens on the wardens walks in the summer. That'd be great.
Cool.
All
Great.
right. Take
Thank you
care,
all
everyone.
very
Have a
much.
nice
Yeah,
evening.
okay. Right. Cheers,
Okay.
man. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.